video is going to be addressing immigration, the evolution of the modern political landscape of the USA, and how right-wing media outlets distort information, all by watching and critiquing a PragerU video. This may seem like low-hanging fruit by some people, but PragerU's view count is a worrying one, so it needs to be done. I'm going to be providing voiceover along with my friend Marxism Noidism.
That's me. Subject of today's discussion is a PragerU video featuring longtime Fox News commentator Tucker Carlson. For those of you living under a Dwayne Johnson, PragerU, or Prager University, is a far-right think tank made by Dennis Prager. This guy is a longtime right-wing pundit and propagandist. He's appeared on several talk shows, he's been featured in many debates, and for a time he had his own radio show.
Regarding Tucker Carlson, aka the man with the most Leave It to Beaver-esque name in history, he's a well-known Fox News propagandist, which, despite its claims of being both fair and balanced, it's basically just the media wing of the Republican Party. Before we really get into the meat and potatoes of this video, we need to address something very important. First, he interchangeably uses the terms the left and the Democratic Party as if they're one and the same. The Democratic Party, for all intents and purposes, is a center-right party that, for decades, has been dominated by corporate neoliberals. The label the left is generally attributed to a person who identifies as either a socialist, communist, or anarchist, and so on and so forth. Tucker also repeatedly claims that the modern Democratic Party holds an open borders policy, which isn't true. You only need to look back at the 2016 Democratic Party platform. Even Bernie Sanders, arguably the farthest left figure in the federal government as of right now, has expressed criticism of such an open borders concept. Of course, his analysis assumes a capitalist wage labor system, but I digress.
Well, get cozy, pour yourself a Chianti, maybe get some fava beans, liver of a census taker. We're rolling. Tucker starts off with a vague reference to an unknown protest of Trump's immigration policies, which isn't an unknown phenomena to happen, just Tucker never says when or where this takes place.
I recently watched a group of protesters, most of them young, denouncing President Donald Trump's immigration policies. They were waving Mexican flags and shouting, "Si se puede!" Yes, we can.
And he falls on his face right out the gate. First of all, si se puede means yes, it can be done, not yes, we can. Second of all, this chant is a slogan for immigration reform, not open borders. We'll get to that momentarily.
This is now the rallying cry of the open borders left, but it wasn't always.
Okay, this is at best rhetorical smearing and a gross misrepresentation of a wide array of leftist views. The concept of open borders is something associated with certain forms of anarchism and late-stage communism. We are a long way from open borders being relevant to American politics. Even the most mainstream politicians and commentators are skeptical of open borders, such as Kyle Kulinski and Bernie Sanders, as we mentioned.
In fact, I wondered if a single person at the protest knew where it came from. The slogan first became famous 50 years ago, thanks to Cesar Chavez. He was the founder of the United Farm Workers Union.
If you took a minute out of your day to visit the UFW's website, you would be able to read the exact origin of the phrase. It was originally coined by Dolores Huerta, not Chavez. Furthermore, Chavez was the co-founder and vice president of the UFW. The president was Huerta himself.
When Chavez said, "Si se puede," he meant something very different. Yes, we can seal the borders. Cesar Chavez hated illegal immigration.
Again, yes, it can be done. And what was to be done was combat anti-farmer lobbying that was affecting Arizona's government at the time. Regarding Chavez hating illegal immigration, he didn't. Ever. He was simply critical and wary of it because he was worried that it would damage the reputation and ability of his union. That's it. And he changed his views in the mid-1970s. Latino Rebels wrote an article about this that's worth checking out. We'll leave a link in the description.
He was Hispanic, obviously, and definitely on the left.
He was a social democrat at best. Yes, he was involved in labor movements and he was a union member, but social democrats tend to be a mixed bag. Chavez being no exception. Chavez showed support for the Filipino dictator Ferdinand Marcos, and of course was, for a time, skeptical of illegal immigration. Left indeed. The personal views of the vice president of one union isn't representative of anything. That'd be like saying all Republicans agreed with Reagan in the 1970s. They didn't.
But he fought to keep illegal Mexican immigrants out of this country. He understood that peasants from Latin America will always work for less than Americans will. That's why employers prefer them. Chavez knew that. As long as we have a poor country bordering California, he once explained, it's going to be very difficult to win strikes.
We couldn't find this quote in our own research, and Tucker never cites where he got it from. We have no context for this quote, what he said after it, anything, and thus its validity is dubious. And as we said, his views changed in the 1970s, so unless he said this after 1974 or so, it's not as significant as anything that came after.
In 1969, Chavez led a march down the center of California to protest the hiring of illegal immigrant produce pickers. Marching alongside him was Democratic Senator Walter Mondale and the Reverend Ralph Abernathy, the longtime aide to Martin Luther King. 10 years later, Chavez dispatched armed union members into the desert to assault Mexican nationals who were trying to sneak across the border.
He sent his cousin Manuel to observe protests. Come on. You know, while we were getting research for this video, we had trouble pinning down where Tucker was getting his info from. It just so happens, after a few weeks, we found something. Tucker more than likely got his info on Chavez from a National Review article written by Mark Krikorian. The article was published on the 31st of March, 2017. The PragerU video came out on the 29th of October, 2018. There's a link in the description to the very article where you can see just how much information and how many talking points the PragerU writers and Tucker took from it. The National Review has a notorious far-right bias, and the writer is a member of a conservative think tank specifically designed to talk about the issue of immigration. Continue through this video with that in mind. Everything Tucker says is unforgivably biased.
Chavez's men beat immigrants with chains and whips made of barbed wire. Illegal aliens who dared to work as scabs had their houses firebombed and their cars burned. Chavez wasn't embarrassed about any of this. He bragged about it.
All of this is completely unsubstantiated. There's no evidence any of this ever happened, and as we proved, this is just plain old propagandist bullshit.
No matter. Chavez remains a progressive hero.
Like we said, Chavez isn't a good representative of the left. No one person is, for that matter. And if you compare him to people like Eugene Debs, Noam Chomsky, even fucking John F. Kennedy, who criticized anti-immigration voices and believed in the lack of distinction between native and naturalized, compared to them, Chavez is really low on the list. He was a sock dem, the vice president of a local union, and he admittedly had some reactionary views. To call him a hero is giving him too much credit.
Cesar Chavez's life is a reminder of how much the left has changed and how quickly. Until recently, most Democrats agreed with Chavez. They opposed unchecked immigration because they knew it hurt American workers.
Keep in mind that at the time, the main focus of the Democratic Party was the Vietnam War. Issues like immigration just seemingly paled in comparison to it on the national level, and was pretty much all but regulated to political sidelines. In fact, immigration wasn't even mentioned in the DNC platform in 1972. Using anecdotal evidence, like referencing the vice president of a union, is not an accurate representation of what the left wants. It's a clear attempt of overplaying a single person, and by that, conflate that person's views with the views of the past left. And yes, Tucker, it does hurt American workers. I'm with you there 100%. But not for the reasons that you think. The problem isn't a bunch of smelly brown people invading the US and stealing our jobs. No. The problem is capitalism. Let me explain. It's not the immigrant workers who determine their wages, Tucker. That falls to the employer and the employer alone, who also take in people that you consider to be illegal. But you also believe in a free market, don't you, Tucker? Shouldn't this be all A-okay under your economic view of laissez-faire capitalism? Why is it that you and your other free market lovers go absolutely insane over immigrants and not the employers who choose these people over American workers? Gee, I wonder. Oh, but capitalism, it's just natural. It isn't like it's forced on all of us by any means possible through the most violent institutions known to mankind.
One study by a Harvard economist examined the effects of the mass migration of Cuban refugees to this country in 1980, the so-called Mariel boat lift. He found that American workers in Miami with a high school education saw their wages fall by more than 30% after the refugees arrived.
I really cannot believe I have to explain this again. The people coming over on these boats didn't choose their wages. That was by the employers seeing that they could make a buck off of people who would accept lower pay. So once again, why is the anger always directed towards the immigrants and never towards the employers?
If you believe in supply and demand, this is not surprising.
Supply and demand for what? Vaguely noting supply and demand doesn't mean fucking squat until you explain your position. All because labor costs are being lowered doesn't mean you can arbitrarily blame it on immigrants. Once again, it is not the fault of the laborer for these wages, but the employer. Right now, it's not an economic issue, but rather it's an issue of who controls the labor market, and it is most certainly not the migrant workers. Not that any of this matters, of course, since the issue of labor costs or how much you pay workers is exclusive to capitalism.
After the fall of Saigon in 1975, Democratic Governor Jerry Brown opposed letting Vietnamese refugees into California on the grounds that the state already had enough poor people.
Brown was, and still is to this day, a neoliberal and represents the party shift from center to center-right. Instead of Democrats getting sock-dem-esque politicians like Roosevelt or Wallace, we got Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton. His views do not represent the left.
As he put it at the time, there's something a little strange about saying, let's bring in 500,000 more people when we can't take care of the 1 million Californians out of work.
Once again, Brown is one of the many politicians who represent a right-leaning shift in the Democratic Party. Tucker then goes on to mention other neoliberals like Joe Biden, Bill Clinton, and Paul Krugman as representatives of the left, when as an actual leftist like myself, these people are far from being quote-unquote left-wing. Keep in mind that the USA's understanding of politics is very skewed to the right in comparison to the rest of the Western world. So much so that a social democrat such as Bernie Sanders is smeared as a hardcore socialist or even a communist by media hacks like MSNBC, and of course Tucker's own shithole of a news network, Fox News.
First-term Senator Joe Biden of Delaware agreed. He introduced federal legislation to curb the arrival of the Vietnamese. 2 decades later, leading Democrats were still wary of mass immigration, especially illegal immigration. As Bill Clinton put it in the 1995 State of the Union address, Americans are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public services they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. No prominent Democrat would say anything like that today without being denounced as a racist. Clinton got a standing ovation.
What Clinton said here wasn't the brightest of arguments, nor was it the most intellectual analysis of immigration. In simpler terms, he's fucking wrong! I guess you can say that it wasn't really well thought out, don't you say? Also, no prominent Democrat would say anything like that today without being denounced as a racist. No, fuck you! No one says that, you're just a xenophobe!
As late as 2006, there were still liberals who cared about the economic effects of immigration, legal or illegal. Immigration reduces the wages of domestic workers who compete with immigrants, explained economist Paul Krugman in the New York Times. We'll need to reduce the inflow of low-skilled immigrants. Mainly that means better controls on illegal immigration. That same year, Senator Hillary Clinton voted for a fence on the Mexican border. So did Barack Obama and Chuck Schumer and 23 other Senate Democrats.
Christ, Tucker, for the fourth time, it's not the immigrants who cause these shifts in the market, nor do they decide their wages. That is the fault of the employers and the employers alone. And this is an issue of capitalism. We've debunked his point on immigration as well as supply and demand to such a degree, addressing it any further would be a waste of time. As for the point about Hillary, Obama, and Schumer, that doesn't help your point. It only shows that they are shifty liberals willing to do what they think will gain them more votes.
20 years after Bill Clinton told Americans they had the right to be upset about illegal immigration, his wife scolded the country for enforcing border controls.
This is vague. Tucker doesn't go into much detail about what it is Clinton was scolding, what language was used, if there were specifics. It's not exactly a smoking gun for Tucker's idea that the Democrats are pro-open borders, which they aren't. Having said that, this is a good place to bring up that Hillary Clinton is, if anything, a prime example of just how awful these neoliberals can be. It's no secret that she's a political charlatan who chases after whatever views will get her highest in the polls. One needs only to look at the 2016 election where she gradually copped Bernie Sanders' platform in an attempt to win over his supporters, which was about as successful as the secret bracelet. You remember the secret bracelet, right? It was that crowdfunding thing with the bracelet, and it had the projected screen on your wrist. Anyway, if she made pancakes, it'd be a perfect golden brown from all the flip-flopping. Hillary is not, by any means, a proper representative of the Democratic Party base. She is, however, the best example of how corrupt the Democratic Party has become and how far right it has shifted over the years.
So what changed?
In regards to the policy of the Democrats during the 70s and onward, very little. If anything, the neoliberal shift in the Democratic Party politics, most heavily seen in the 90s, brought on more conservative policies, not leftist or even liberal ones. Of course, that's not to exclude the Republicans. Tucker Carlson advocates for rigorously strict immigration policies bordering on just plain nationalistic xenophobia. Far cry from the days of Reagan, a politician who he and his fellow sycophants fawn over like sheep.
And Democrats? Well, they've gone completely off the deep end. 20 years ago, Bill Clinton gave speeches, including the State of the Union address, calling illegal immigration a danger to the middle class, because it was, demonstrably. Try saying that now at a Democratic fundraising dinner. You'd be dragged off the stage and charged with bigotry. Democrats are now affirmatively in favor of illegal immigration, not an overstatement. They tried to shut down the government on behalf of illegal aliens.
And I supported this bill. I believe in the idea of amnesty for those who have put down roots and who have lived here, even though sometime back they
not the economics of it, the law of supply and demand remained in effect. It's not a coincidence that as illegal immigration surged, wages for American workers stagnated. What changed is that Democrats stopped caring about those workers.
And the Republicans are better somehow? Come on. I mean, Tucker is mostly correct, but I'd be hard-pressed to call his party anything close to pro-workers. Here's how it is. The Democrats don't really give a damn about the working class. The Republicans really don't give a damn.
About the middle class, really. Why? Here's the answer in 4 simple facts. 1. According to a recent study from Yale, there are at least 22 million illegal immigrants living in the United States. 2. Democrats plan to give all of them citizenship. Read the Democrats' 2016 party platform.
Yes, Mr. Tucker Carlson from Fox News, let us read their party platform as you insist we do. The Democratic Party supports legal immigration within reasonable limits that meets the needs of families, communities, and the economy, as well as maintains the United States' role as a beacon of hope for people seeking safety, freedom, and security. People should come to the United States with visas and not through smugglers. Yet we recognize that the current immigration system is broken. I'm gonna be real with you, Chief, that doesn't sound like amnesty to me. Not even Bernie Sanders believes in it, and he's the son of a Polish immigrant. We'll leave links in the description to both the Democratic Party's and Bernie's platforms.
3. Studies show the overwhelming majority of first-time immigrant voters vote Democrat. 4. The biggest landslide in American presidential history was only 17 million votes. Do the math. The payoff for Democrats? Permanent electoral majority for the foreseeable future. In a word, power.
When we started doing the research for this, we knew that this video was ultimately a neocon propaganda piece, basically stating something along the lines of, "The brown people will make America communism," but we didn't know where the underlying narrative was being propagated from. Of course, that was before the National Review thing. The article focuses almost entirely on Chavez, so that leaves this narrative sort of open-ended. The best explanation is that this video, for all intents and purposes, was furnished as a propaganda piece from the start, and now that they've laid down some epic facts and logic, they can jump in and just smear the entire opposition without care.
That's the point, no matter what they tell you. American workers be damned.
Do not listen to the left. Do not listen to the liberals. Do not listen to anyone outside your ideological sphere. Remain in the echo chamber. Even though we won't call it an echo chamber. It's a rational discussion of ideas.
Hello everyone. As a quick final note to end off this video, I'd like to mention that the current rate of immigration into the US is a net negative. With that in mind, just understand that any attempt at making immigration an issue is just reactionary distractions from real world issues. Like the fact that there are only 11 more years to turn around our energy usage before we inflict severe permanent damage to the planet. More videos are in the works, so stay tuned, and I hope everyone enjoys the holidays.
I'm Tucker Carlson.
I'm Marxism-Noidism.
I'm Red American.
I am the Senate.
Soros owes me 3 years worth of back pay.
And this is where the video ends.